Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. And I think it's time we go deep diving into this rookie class. It's time that we really dig our hands all the way up to our elbows into these top Seahawks rookies for 2023. I've been talking about doing this series for a couple weeks now. I've been putting it off, mostly because I wanted more time to look at stuff. I had other things that I needed to talk about in the immediate aftermath of the draft. But finally, here we are, and finally, here we go. So, over the next couple weeks, I'll be covering all of our draft picks one by one. And unlike previous videos, where I'm trying to be very succinct, be very quick, be very brief, and go through players somewhat rapidly, now we're going to take our time because we know we have the player. Like, I don't have an obligation to sit here and talk about 250 different players because I know the 10 players that we picked. There's no need to hurry things up so I can get to the next player because there is no next player. Or, well, there are only 9 more next players, really. So, now that we know these guys are on the team, we can take all the time we want to talk about exactly what makes these players interesting, what makes them good, what they might need to get better at, or what they might not be able to do so well. And by the end, hopefully have a really good understanding of what we're talking about with this rookie class. So let's start with Devon Witherspoon. And that's the first thing we're going to learn about him. His name is pronounced Devin, even though it's clearly spelled Devon. I don't get it either. But anyway, Devon Witherspoon was our top pick, one of the highest picks the Seahawks have made in recent memory. Number 5 overall, it was a pick that surprised a lot of people, although it was being bandied about a good amount leading up into the draft. And if you believe the Seahawks, when they tell the story, they really liked him, and they were really happy to get him at 5. He's a cornerback, and right then and there, a lot of people get confused because they're wondering why we spent a top 5 pick on a cornerback when we've had so much success getting cornerbacks later in the draft. But I'm not really going to talk about that part of it because that has nothing to do with the player. But I do understand that is one of the key criticisms of this pick that people do have. He was a member of the Illinois Fighting Illini last year. And by the way, they had the number 1 defense in college football. They allowed the fewest points per game. This guy's going to be 22 years old when the season starts, so still nice and young. So let's start really deep diving into what makes this guy good. So, not remarkable in terms of size. That's the thing to understand here. He's got about average stature. 5'11 and a half makes him 54th percentile, so right in the middle. Knowing that if you compare him to other outside cornerbacks, he's a little bit smaller because a lot of the shorter guys end up playing in the nickel, but overall, he's right around the middle. He's very light, 181 pounds, 10th percentile, so he's one of the lighter cornerbacks to go through the combine process. He's got slightly below average arm length for a corner, 31 and a quarter inch arms, 8 and 7/8 inch hands, 25th percentile, so he's got kind of small hands for a cornerback. He did not test at the combine. He did not test at his pro day. The only thing I found on him was a private workout where he did run a 40, and it was a 4.42 40. Now, it is generally believed that he's capable of running like a 4.38 or a 4.37, but he was still recovering from the hamstring injury when he ran this 40, so it's a little bit slower than he's capable of. So, either way, that's not bad. We see cornerbacks excel in this league who run a lot slower than that in a straight line all the time. Unfortunately, we don't have any other testing numbers with him, and I suspect that those testing numbers would be the numbers that are really, really impressive. Regardless, those are the testing scores and measurements that we have with him. So now let's talk about his career. We're just going to start by going through the 4 years that he spent with Illinois. 2019, he played in all 12 games, but he was a part-time player. I don't think he started any games. Less than 390 snaps, made 33 tackles, and had 2 passes defensed. So part-time player, not a big part of that defense, didn't make a big impact. He mostly lined up as an outside corner. 338 of his snaps were on the outside, 18 reps in the slot, 7 he lined up in the box, and 26 times he lined up as a defensive lineman, which is actually kind of interesting for a guy of this size. His coverage numbers when he was in coverage were good. I mean, he's playing 338 reps on the outside. He only gets targeted 19 times, gives up 9 catches, 160 yards, pretty significant, but this is not bad. No touchdowns allowed, no interceptions, 76.6 QB rating, and his overall PFF grade was 65.4. Really, really good in run defense, according to PFF this year, almost a 90 there. Not a great tackling score here, though, and you kind of figure that would be like contradictory. Like, how can you have such a high run defense score but a low tackling score? Sometimes I don't know what PFF does with their calculations. His coverage metrics were okay this year. Again, it wasn't something that he had a huge sample size of doing in 2019, but this was the year that kind of put him on the map on college football. Remember, 0-star recruit. And then in 2020, he only played in 7 games, missed significant time, and the snaps that he did play were, I mean, they weren't terrible, but he gave up a lot in coverage this year. This is the one year where he got beat up in coverage. 468 snaps, he had 31 tackles, so his playing time went up. He had less tackles, though. 1 tackle for loss, 2 picks, so he finally started making plays on the ball and taking the ball away this year. He recovered 3 fumbles, and he forced a fumble. Did have 4 missed tackles on his ledger, though, so did stumble a little bit there, but nothing too critical, I would say. If you take a look at where he lined up, again, he actually lined up on the defensive line a decent amount, a few times a game. 14 box reps, 19 slot reps, but mostly he continued to play on the outside. 403 snaps on the outside as a cornerback and 5 snaps as a free safety. And this is the year he got beat up in coverage. 2020, he got targeted 33 times in 7 games, gave up 22 catches, so more than 3 catches a game, 381 yards, so a lot of yards, including 200 yards after the catch, 4 touchdowns. So he was getting punished out there a little bit. Gave up a QB rating of 122.6. Now, his overall grade as a player was still good. He was still really good against the run. He improved dramatically as a tackler, and he wasn't necessarily terrible in coverage at this point. He actually had a slightly above water grade in this year, but you can see where he needed to make clear steps forward as a player. Again, at this point, you got to understand where Witherspoon was coming from. He was a 0-star recruit out of high school who just found his way to the Illinois team and was a part-time player this first year, and then the second year, it's a mixed bag, right? Like, he's a good tackler, he's good in run defense, but coverage, right now, it was kind of a mess. And then 2021 is when we started to get a hint that this guy might be something special. Just a hint. 10 games, 740 snaps, so he was now basically a full-time player, playing every snap for his team on defense. 52 tackles, 8 for loss, which is really significant for a cornerback. And you watch him play, it makes sense. And I'll talk more about that later. But 8 tackles for loss, he had a sack as well, 9 passes defense, so he starts to make a lot of plays on the ball. Did miss 7 tackles, which we're not crazy about, but overall, still somebody who's very effective against the run, a very good tackler on defense, and he's now starting to pair that up with legit coverage skills. Now he starts to play more in the slot as well, by the way. 83 slot reps. He starts to stop playing so much on the defensive line. He starts to play more in the slot, still almost always playing outside, but the fact that he was effective in the slot, and we'll talk more about that later, is very encouraging to me about his long-term NFL future. Got targeted 58 times, so about 6 times a game, allowed 34 catches, 421 yards, only 40 more yards than he allowed the previous year, despite being targeted 25 more times. That's great. That's awesome. Less yards after the catch as well, 152. Only allowed the 1 touchdown. Overall QB rating allowed 86.9. So he took a big step forward in 2021 and became a good, credible cornerback. And adding to that with how well he was playing against the run with all these tackles for loss, how good a tackler that he was, you start to see things come out. His grade goes up a little bit. He's still really good against the run, good tackler. His covered numbers start to pick up. But nothing could have prepared people for what happened in 2022. Played the full season this time, 12 games, 738 snaps. Again, this was the #1 defense in the country. They made a big improvement from the previous year. 41 tackles. You can see that his tackles numbers actually went down a decent amount, big reason why is because he just stopped giving up catches, so there was nothing to tackle. 2.5 tackles for loss, 3 picks, 14 passes defensed. So during these final 2 seasons of his college career, he started averaging about 1 pass defense a game and 5 missed tackles. So everything is basically just improving, right? He's also barely playing on the defensive line or in the box anymore, relatively speaking. He's got about 100 reps in the slot and 614 reps on the outside. So he's showing that versatility. These coverage numbers are off the charts. They should be illegal. 62 targets, 22 receptions, so completion percentage below 40, 206 yards allowed, and half of those yards were in one game. 71 yards after the catch allowed, 25.3 QB rating. Insanely good. PFF grade overall, 92. As good as it gets. Great against the run, really good tackler, and historically good in coverage. So that gets us to where we are right now, and you take a look at his career overall. Played in 41 games. He's got over 2,300 snaps of experience on defense alone, by the way. That doesn't count special teams, but he did play a lot of special teams, of course. 157 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, most of them that one season. A sack, 5 picks, 25 passes defensed, most of those coming in the last 2 years. 3 fumble recoveries and a forced fumble. I do feel like he's going to force more fumbles in the NFL because he is such a hard hitter. I think he kind of got unlucky with how few fumbles he forced in college football. And the thing, you can take a look at his snap distribution, and it's interesting in some areas. But I think the thing that really demands attention is playing almost 2,000 snaps on the outside and almost 230 snaps as the slot cornerback. Keep that in mind as we move forward here. All right, so that is Devon Witherspoon by the numbers. Those are the cold, hard facts of him as a player. That's what he's done so far in his college career. That's what he is objectively. Now, next video, which is coming out later today, we're going to talk more about Witherspoon, but we're going to talk about the player. Not the numbers, not the stats, but we're going to talk about the player, because these numbers, they tell us where he's been. But if we take a look at Witherspoon, the player, we get an idea of where maybe he's going. See you guys later today for that.